In June 2025, a troubling incident unfolded on live television as Australian journalist Lauren Tomasi, a U.S. correspondent for 9 News, was struck by a rubber bullet while covering protests in downtown Los Angeles. The protests were a response to controversial immigration enforcement raids and the deployment of federal troops, actions that had sparked widespread civil unrest across several U.S. cities. The moment Tomasi was hit was captured live, drawing immediate concern and sparking international outrage. Tomasi was standing with her camera crew, clearly marked as press, when a law enforcement officer fired a rubber bullet that struck her in the leg. The force of the impact caused her to cry out and momentarily lose balance. The broadcast showed her visibly shaken, while her cameraman moved quickly to get them to safety. Despite the frightening encounter, Tomasi later confirmed she was sore but otherwise okay, and thanked viewers for their support. Her professionalism in the immediate aftermath was widely commended. The incident occurred amid increasing tensions between protesters and law enforcement. The federal government had ordered aggressive crackdowns on protest gatherings, deploying not only LAPD officers but also members of the National Guard and Marines, a move criticized by civil rights advocates and political opponents alike. Reports from the scene indicated that journalists and peaceful demonstrators were caught in the crossfire of escalating crowd control tactics that included rubber bullets, tear gas, and baton charges. Australia's response was swift. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese described the footage as horrific and expressed deep concern over the safety of Australian citizens abroad, especially journalists performing their duties. He emphasized that Tomasi had been clearly identifiable as a member of the media, holding a microphone and reporting live on air. Albanese confirmed that the Australian government raised the matter with U.S. officials and was monitoring developments closely. He reiterated Australia's stance on protecting press freedom, calling for accountability and transparency in how crowd control tactics are implemented. The incident also prompted a response from 9 News Australia, which condemned the attack on its journalist and stated it would fully cooperate with any investigations. The network's CEO, Matt Stanton, said that Lauren Tomasi and her cameraman Jimmy were recovering and being provided with full support. He stressed that no journalist should ever be placed in harm's way while doing their job, especially when clearly marked as press. Australia's Media, Entertainment and Arts Alliance, MEAA, joined the chorus of condemnation, calling for a formal investigation into the use of force against journalists. The union released a statement emphasizing that members of the press are not combatants and must be treated with the same protection as other frontline personnel. This is not just about Lauren Tomasi, the MEAA stated. It is about the broader principle of press freedom and the ability of journalists to work without fear of violence or intimidation. Opposition leaders in Australia, including Senator Sarah Hanson-Young and Karl Stefanovich, echoed these sentiments and called for stronger diplomatic engagement to prevent future incidents of this nature. Some political analysts suggested that the incident could cast a shadow over upcoming diplomatic discussions, including the G7 summit, where both Albanese and U.S. President Donald Trump were expected to meet. As of now, the LAPD has launched an internal investigation into the circumstances that led to Tomasi being shot. The department acknowledged public concern and stated that it would examine body cam footage and tactical decisions made during the protest. While Lauren Tomasi has resumed her duties, the episode has reignited debate over the use of non-lethal weapons in protest management and the ongoing risks faced by journalists reporting from conflict zones, even in democratic nations. This incident stands as a stark reminder of the dangers frontline reporters face and the critical importance of protecting journalistic freedom in volatile situations. Shane Dixon, a devoted father of 3, was eagerly looking forward to his very first cruise aboard PEO's Pacific Adventure in Australia. Accompanying him was his mother, Sue Dixon, who had generously paid for the trip as a special treat for both of them. Shane was so excited about the upcoming journey that he shared several photos on social media, including one where he smiled broadly at the harbor just moments before boarding the cruise ship alongside his mother. The captions expressed how happy and thrilled he was to be partaking in this new adventure. Once on board, Shane was quickly drawn to the allure of the ship's casino. The flashing lights, the sounds of slot machines, and the promise of quick wins enticed him to give gambling a try. What began as casual play soon took a darker turn as Shane lost a significant amount of money but kept going, unable to stop. Before long, his losses snowballed and he found himself facing a hefty $5,000 debt. Later that same night, in a desperate attempt to cover his losses, Shane borrowed $5,000 from his mother. For most, such a big loss might serve as a warning sign to stop, but Shane's gambling continued unchecked. The very next night, he returned to the casino and racked up an even more staggering debt of $40,000 on top of what he already owed. As the cruise neared its end, Shane faced an impossible situation. With mounting debts and no immediate way to pay them off, he was trapped in a spiraling nightmare. His mother had already exhausted her support, and Shane was left grappling with the pressure of his growing financial burden. Then, just 2 hours before the ship was scheduled to dock back in Sydney, Shane made a tragic and shocking decision. He jumped overboard. The seas that night were rough, with waves reaching heights of 5 meters, making the search for Shane incredibly difficult. Despite these challenging conditions, rescuers managed to recover his body a few hours later. The news of his death stunned everyone on board. Passengers who had seen Shane just hours earlier described him as energetic and seemingly happy, which made his sudden and drastic action all the more heartbreaking and confusing. In the aftermath, Shane's family spoke out, sharing the emotional and personal struggles he had faced in the years leading up to the cruise. They revealed that Shane had been dealing with numerous setbacks, including serious health issues, the deaths of family members, and the breakdown of his marriage. This had led to estrangement from his children, leaving him feeling isolated and overwhelmed. On social media, Shane had been open about his struggles, often discussing how difficult life had become for him. The gambling losses he accumulated on the cruise ship seemed to have been the tipping point. For Shane, the debts represented more than just money lost. They symbolized a feeling of hopelessness and a sense that there was no way back from his mistakes. Beyond Shane's personal troubles, his family also directed criticism at the casino environment aboard the ship. They accused the casino of using manipulative tactics designed to keep gamblers playing longer and spending more money. Several other passengers who gambled alongside Shane came forward, confirming these claims. They reported being offered free drinks, prizes, and vouchers as incentives to stay engaged. Additionally, many players were unaware of how much they had lost because the casino allowed losses to be charged directly to their rooms rather than requiring immediate payment. The family also highlighted the lack of effective safeguards. Several people said they asked for self-exclusion options, a way to voluntarily ban themselves from gambling, but were told by casino staff that such options weren't available on the ship. In response to these allegations, a spokesperson for P&O Cruises denied any wrongdoing by the casino. They emphasized that responsible gambling policies are firmly in place across all their vessels and that they take these policies seriously to protect passengers. Despite these reassurances, Shane Dixon's family was left to cope with the devastating loss of a loved one. His mother, Sue, especially, was left heartbroken and struggling to understand how a joyful trip could end in such tragedy. The story of Shane Dixon highlights not only the dangers of problem gambling, but also raises important questions about the responsibilities of casinos on cruise ships to safeguard their patrons. Tommy Cooper was one of Britain's most iconic comedians, instantly recognizable with his towering height, booming voice, and that ever-present red fez perched on his head. With his unique blend of slapstick humor and intentionally clumsy magic tricks, he had a way of making people laugh with his sheer presence alone. But on the evening of April 15th, 1984, what began as another night of entertainment on a live television show quickly turned into one of the most tragic and shocking moments in British broadcast history. That Sunday, Cooper was performing on a popular variety program called Live from Her Majesty's, which was being aired live to millions of viewers on ITV. The show was hosted by Jimmy Tarbuck and featured a number of musical and comedic acts. When Tommy Cooper walked onto the stage, the crowd greeted him with enthusiastic applause. It was just another performance in a long and storied career, or so it seemed. Cooper began his routine in classic fashion, delivering one-liners, fumbling through deliberately terrible magic tricks, and using his imposing frame to great comedic effect. But then, as he was in the middle of a bit involving a cloak and some props handed to him by his assistant, he suddenly staggered backwards and collapsed against the curtain. The fall looked theatrical, almost like part of the act. The audience, familiar with his slapstick antics, burst into laughter, assuming it was just another physical gag from the master of comedic timing. However, after a few seconds, it became evident that something was very wrong. Cooper did not get back up. His assistant, still on stage, appeared visibly confused and concerned. Behind the scenes, stagehands quickly realized that Cooper had suffered a medical emergency. The director of the live broadcast made the quick decision to cut to a commercial break to avoid further confusion and give medical staff time to respond. Backstage, the atmosphere shifted from confusion to panic. Cooper had collapsed from a massive heart attack. Efforts were made to resuscitate him, and paramedics rushed to the scene. Meanwhile, the show continued after the commercial break, with other performers taking the stage. Most of them had no idea what had just happened. The producers decided to carry on with the program to avoid alarming the live audience or the viewers at home. Despite the swift medical response, Tommy Cooper was later pronounced dead at Westminster Hospital. He was 63 years old. The news of his death was not officially announced until after the show had ended, leaving viewers stunned when they learned the truth. Many had been watching in real time and had no idea that the moment they had laughed at was the final moment of a beloved performer's life. The incident had a profound impact on fans, colleagues, and the entertainment industry as a whole. Cooper's sudden death on stage became a haunting reminder of the unpredictability of live performance and the fine line between comedy and tragedy. His legacy, however, has endured. Generations continue to enjoy his performances through old recordings, and he remains a symbol of classic British comedy. Even decades later, the surreal and tragic nature of Tommy Cooper's final performance is remembered as one of the most poignant moments in television history. Though he died doing what he loved, most making people laugh, his final bow was a moment of heartbreaking reality that left a nation in shock and mourning. In 1984, a case out of Baton Rouge, Louisiana, shocked the nation and raised questions that are still debated to this day, questions about justice, vengeance, and the limits of human restraint. It all began when 11-year-old Jody Plosh, a bright and athletic young boy, was abducted by his 25-year-old karate instructor, Jeff Doucet. What seemed like a trusting mentorship turned into a nightmare when Doucet, abusing his position of power, kidnapped Jody and took him on a cross-country trip to a motel in California. During this time, Doucet not only kept Jody hidden from his panicked family and authorities, but he also allegedly sexually assaulted him, a revelation that would horrify any parent. When the FBI finally located them and brought Jody home safely, relief swept through the Plosh family. But for Jody's father, Gary, something darker was brewing beneath the surface. Gary wasn't just relieved, he was enraged. While most parents might place their faith in the justice system, Gary's faith had been shattered by the unthinkable trauma inflicted on his son. And so, as Doucet was being extradited back to Baton Rouge to face charges, Gary made a decision that would burn his name into history books and public memory forever. On March 16, 1984, Gary arrived at the Baton Rouge Metropolitan Airport with a small caliber revolver hidden under his jacket. He positioned himself near a row of payphones, wearing a baseball cap and dark glasses, pretending to be just another guy making a call. What he was really doing was waiting for the man who had stolen his son's innocence. As Doucet walked through the airport, flanked by law enforcement officers, TV news cameras rolling, Gary turned around, raised his gun, and fired a single shot into the side of Doucet's head. The moment was so sudden, so precise, that it stunned the police officers right next to him and shocked viewers who would later see it play out on television. Doucet collapsed instantly, and although he was rushed to the hospital, he died the next day. Gary was immediately arrested on the scene, but public opinion was anything but unanimous. Many Americans viewed Gary's actions as understandable, even justifiable, a grieving, outraged father taking justice into his own hands. Others argued that no matter how emotionally charged the circumstances, vigilante violence couldn't be tolerated in a society built on rule of law. In a remarkable twist, the court seemed to lean toward mercy. Gary Plosh was charged with second-degree murder but ended up pleading no contest to a reduced charge of manslaughter. The sentence? 7 years suspended, 5 years probation, and 300 hours of community service. He served not a single day in prison. While some critics were disturbed by what they saw as a lenient punishment, others saw it as a compassionate response to a man pushed to his psychological limits. The event lives on today in true crime documentaries, ethics classrooms, and viral video compilations as people continue to argue, was Gary a hero, a criminal, or something in between? In later interviews, Gary expressed regret not for feeling anger, but for the action he took, acknowledging that violence, even in vengeance, comes with a heavy burden. Jody, now grown, has spoken openly about the ordeal and has said he forgave his father, understanding the torment that led him to that moment. It remains a chilling yet deeply human story of pain, of justice, of a father's love pushed to the edge. On September 23, 2002, 42-year-old Diane Brimble stepped aboard the Pacific Sky cruise ship, eager to begin what was supposed to be a dream 10-day vacation. Accompanied by her daughter, sister, and niece, Diane looked forward to an unforgettable family getaway to Noumea, New Caledonia, and Vanuatu. But within just 24 hours of setting sail, that dream turned into a tragic nightmare. That evening, Diane headed to the ship's disco to unwind, dance, and enjoy the carefree atmosphere. As a mother of 3, this vacation was a rare moment to let loose, and she did, smiling, laughing, and drinking freely. Unfortunately, her good spirits caught the attention of Richard Wilhelm, one of 8 men who had boarded the cruise together. Witnesses would later say these men spent much of the trip flirting aggressively and propositioning various women on board. At the disco, a cheerful and slightly tipsy Diane wrapped her arms around a ship's security guard, attempting to dance with him. The guard smiled, indulging the moment before Diane wandered off. But within 2 hours, she was seen leaving the disco with Wilhelm. That would be the last time any of her family ever saw her alive. 3 days later, on September 26th, while the ship was docked in Noumea, police detectives came aboard after being informed of a mysterious death, Diane's. Her lifeless body had been discovered in Wilhelm's cabin, where he was staying with 3 other men. Despite attempts to revive her, nothing could be done. Diane's body was eventually flown back to Brisbane, where she lived. A somber funeral was held, attended by over 24 mourners. At first, authorities attributed her death to a heart attack, but toxicology reports painted a darker picture. High levels of GHB, often called the date rape drug, were found in her system, along with alcohol. With these disturbing findings, an inquest into Diane's death was launched in March 2006. It was revealed that Wilhelm had given her the drug, but claimed it was done with her full knowledge and consent. Investigators confirmed that the two had engaged in consensual sex, and disturbing images found on a memory card belonging to one of Wilhelm's friends seemed to support this. However, it also became clear that Diane may have been manipulated and used for the group's amusement. Wilhelm wasn't the only one implicated. Mario Silvestri, another member of the group, was identified as the one who supplied the drug. Charges were filed against Wilhelm, Silvestri, and a third associate, Ryan Kuhl. Wilhelm faced manslaughter and drug charges, while the other 2 were accused of obstructing justice. Wilhelm's first trial in 2009 ended in a mistrial due to a hung jury. A second trial began in April 2010. In a surprising move, Wilhelm pleaded guilty to manslaughter, but the judge rejected the plea, stating that there wasn't enough evidence to prove he intended harm and that Diane had willingly taken the drug. Eventually, Wilhelm pled guilty to the lesser charge of supplying a prohibited substance. The judge, citing the public scrutiny and mental health issues Wilhelm had endured since the incident, opted not to impose further punishment. The outcome sparked outrage from Diane's family, who felt justice had not been served. A financial settlement from P&O Cruises did little to ease their grief. Yet, Diane Brimble's tragic death wasn't entirely in vain. It led to stronger safety protocols on Australian cruise ships, including the introduction of sniffer dogs to detect drugs on board. Her story remains a chilling reminder that even in paradise, danger can hide in plain sight. On the morning of January 28, 1986, America tuned in with a rare, united sense of anticipation. It was a day that was supposed to mark a hopeful new chapter in space exploration, a mission not just for science, but for inspiration. The Space Shuttle Challenger, set to embark on mission STS-51L, carried 7 astronauts, including a schoolteacher named Krista McAuliffe, who was selected from thousands to become the first civilian and educator in space. For millions of students across the country, her presence transformed this launch into a personal event. Classrooms paused lessons to watch it live. Parents, educators, and the press rallied around the idea that this was a turning point, a blending of space science and public engagement. But within 73 seconds of liftoff, that hopeful moment dissolved into horror as the Challenger broke apart in midair, a bright fireball suddenly replacing the elegant arc of the shuttle's ascent. What looked like an explosion unfolded in front of stunned eyes. Viewers, including children, teachers, and news anchors, were struck silent as the twin booster rockets spiraled off course and a twisted cloud of smoke remained where a proud vehicle had just been. There were no survivors. The crew, Commander Francis Scobie, pilot Michael J. Smith, mission specialists Ronald McNair, Ellison Onizuka, and Judith Resnick, Payload specialist Gregory Jarvis and Krista McAuliffe had been lost in what was later revealed to be a preventable catastrophe. Investigations showed that the cause of the failure was a faulty O-ring seal in the right solid rocket booster. These rings, essentially rubber gaskets designed to prevent hot gas from escaping, had become brittle in the unusually cold Florida morning. The night before the launch, temperatures had dropped below freezing, a rarity for the area. Engineers at Morton Thiokol, the manufacturer of the boosters, expressed serious concerns. Some pleaded with NASA to postpone the launch, warning that the O-rings might not hold. But amid immense schedule pressure, public attention, and political stakes, NASA officials pressed forward. When the shuttle launched, the O-rings failed almost immediately, allowing hot gases to escape and burn through the external fuel tank. This led to the structural disintegration of the shuttle, not an explosion in the Hollywood sense, but a collapse of the vehicle under extreme aerodynamic forces. The Rogers Commission, formed by President Reagan to investigate the disaster, laid bare a haunting combination of technical flaws and organizational failures. It wasn't just the hardware, it was the culture. Engineers had known for years that the O-rings had issues. Warnings were raised but routinely dismissed or downplayed. The commission exposed a communication breakdown within NASA where concerns from lower-level engineers never reached decision-makers or were actively suppressed. The result was a tragedy not born of chance, but of complacency. The Challenger disaster sent shockwaves through NASA and the country. Shuttle missions were suspended for nearly 3 years. There was a deep reevaluation of safety protocols, risk communication, and organizational decision-making. Krista McAuliffe's dream of teaching from space never came to life, but her legacy reshaped how space exploration would be approached moving forward. The Challenger's crew is now remembered not just for how they died, but for why they flew, to explore, to teach, to push boundaries. It remains one of the most powerful reminders that in the pursuit of greatness, caution, honesty, and accountability are not optional, they are essential. It was an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in Guayaquil, Ecuador, when the unexpected unfolded on live television. Viewers tuned in to TC television expecting regular news coverage, only to witness a chilling reality play out before their eyes. Around 2 p.m., a group of 13 masked and heavily armed men stormed the live broadcast studio. They carried guns, grenades, and even dynamite, creating a terrifying scene of chaos and fear. The staff were forced to the floor, and the intruders demanded airtime to issue threatening messages. The broadcast continued briefly, capturing the tension as one cameraman was shot in the leg and another suffered a broken arm. This was not a performance or a prank. It was a calculated act of aggression that exposed the growing boldness of criminal groups in the country. Viewers watched in disbelief as what should have been an afternoon news segment turned into a hostage crisis broadcast to thousands across the nation. It marked a turning point not just in Ecuador's media history, but in the broader struggle the country was facing with organized crime and escalating violence. Authorities acted swiftly. Within approximately 20 to 40 minutes, tactical police units and military forces stormed the studio in a high-stakes rescue operation. Hostages were freed and all 13 assailants were taken into custody. The intervention was swift and decisive, bringing the dangerous situation to an end without further loss of life, yet the message had already been sent. The incident was more than a violent act. It was symbolic. It showed how far criminal organizations were willing to go to instill fear and exert control, even over national broadcasts. Ecuador had already been grappling with rising violence, sparked by the recent escape of Adolfo Fito Macias, a notorious gang leader linked to drug trafficking and prison riots. This televised siege added fuel to a growing fire. The government responded by declaring a nationwide state of emergency. President Daniel Noboa also labeled 22 criminal gangs as terrorist groups and authorized military action against them. This marked a shift in the country's approach to combating organized crime, moving toward a more aggressive and militarized response to a crisis that had long been brewing beneath the surface. The aftermath was significant. TC Television ceased operations for 2 days, and many journalists involved in the incident reported trauma, including anchor Jose Luis Calderon, who later spoke about seeking psychological support. The attack left a lasting impression on the public, raising urgent questions about safety, media freedom, and the state's ability to protect its institutions. It also forced a reevaluation of how Ecuador confronts the growing power of gangs and the influence they hold over both urban and rural areas. Internationally, the event drew concern and offers of assistance, including from the United States. Meanwhile, Ecuador intensified its border security, cracked down on gang operations, and increased military presence in key regions. What began as a shocking interruption on live television quickly became a national emergency, revealing the depth of the country's internal conflict. The studio takeover was more than a violent outburst. It was a clear sign that the battle between state authority and criminal organizations had entered a new and more dangerous phase. And for the people of Ecuador, it served as both a wake-up call and a chilling reminder of the stakes involved in reclaiming public safety. Nigel Blythe Tinker, a 45-year-old legal expert known for his significant influence in the gaming industry, was heading back to England after spending some time in Australia. Throughout his career, Nigel had made a name for himself, holding key roles at William Hill and later as chairman at GVC Holdings, the multi-billion-pound parent company of Ladbrokes. His leadership shaped a major chapter in the gaming world. Before making his way home, Nigel decided to take a one-day cruise aboard the Seven Seas Mariner on July 23rd. The reasons for this short getaway remain unclear, but many speculate he wanted one last bit of adventure before returning to everyday life. The cruise appeared smooth and uneventful until Nigel suddenly went missing as the ship neared its final destination. His family tried to reach him but received no response, sparking concern. Ship authorities were alerted and a search began. When staff checked Nigel's cabin, they found it empty, his clothes folded neatly on the bed. A thorough search of the ship failed to find any sign of him, alive or otherwise. Nigel was officially declared missing, and an investigation was launched, but no trace was found. Months later, CCTV footage from the ship offered a chilling clue. It showed a figure, believed to be Nigel, falling from the ship near his cabin balcony late at night. This new evidence led Nigel's daughter, Sophie Elizabeth Blee Tinker, to seek legal closure through a presumption of death claim. During the proceedings, Sophie shared details the family hadn't disclosed before. They had kept in touch with Nigel for much of the trip, but noticed his behavior was unusual. He sent confusing and troubling messages that suggested he wasn't himself. One message to a cousin revealed deep despair, raising concerns for his mental well-being. Responding to those worries, the ship's doctor visited Nigel, but he denied feeling suicidal. Nigel reassured the doctor that physically he was fine, aside from some back pain. Despite this, the video footage and messages paint a picture of a man in distress on that fateful night. What exactly happened remains a mystery. Since the ship was miles away from any port or land when Nigel disappeared, rescue would have been nearly impossible. There were no nearby boats, and swimming to safety was highly unlikely. Was it a tragic accident, or did Nigel purposefully jump? No definitive answers have emerged. Theories continue to circulate, but none provide closure. Nigel's disappearance just a week before his 46th birthday leaves many questions unanswered. His family is left grappling with grief and the haunting uncertainty of what truly occurred on that cruise ship. This story is a somber reminder that even in moments meant for relaxation and joy, unseen battles and tragedies can unfold, leaving loved ones searching for answers that may never come. The tragic story of Daniel V. Jones is one of those moments that left a permanent scar on live television history, and even more so on how we view desperation, mental health, and the healthcare system. On April 30th, 1998, during the busy afternoon rush hour in Los Angeles, 40-year-old Jones drove his white pickup truck onto an overpass of the 110 freeway near Harbor City, parked his vehicle, and staged a disturbing protest that would soon unfold live on countless TV screens across America. Jones wasn't just some random man with a grudge. He was someone suffering from both cancer and HIV, feeling utterly let down by his HMO, which he claimed had failed him repeatedly. According to letters and videos he had prepared ahead of time, Jones was furious over delays in treatment, a lack of compassion, and what he felt was a system more interested in profit than people. When he stopped his car that day, he had a shotgun, several handwritten protest signs, a gasoline canister, a video camera, and heartbreakingly, his dog with him. Television helicopters arrived swiftly, and news stations, perhaps sensing something dramatic unfolding, began broadcasting the standoff live. For over an hour, the nation watched as Jones held up signs blaming HMOs for prioritizing money over lives, urging people to live freely and fight for safer health care. At one point, in a moment that deeply disturbed viewers, he released his dog from the truck only to tragically shoot it moments later, a gesture that left many shocked and confused. But the most horrifying moment was still to come. After standing atop his truck and pouring gasoline over himself, Jones, still being filmed in real time, lit himself on fire and then, while engulfed in flames, took his own life with a single shotgun blast to the head. The camera captured everything. Several stations, caught off guard and without a time delay, broadcast the entire sequence live to unsuspecting viewers, including children who happened to be watching TV that afternoon. The backlash was immediate and fierce. News networks were slammed for airing something so graphic without warning, and the incident led to many stations reevaluating their live coverage policies. But beyond the media firestorm, Jones's final act raised haunting questions about the state of America's healthcare system. Was he mentally ill, pushed to the edge by disease and despair? Or was this a calculated, tragic message to the world? A final cry for help and justice from someone who felt invisible? In his pre-recorded tapes and notes, Jones made it clear that he didn't want to die in silence. He wanted people to know how deeply he had suffered, not just from illness, but from neglect and bureaucracy. While many were understandably horrified by the nature of his protest, others couldn't help but acknowledge the bitter truth behind his anger. His suicide, as gruesome and tragic as it was, brought attention to the very real pain of navigating a broken healthcare system. Today, the Daniel V. Jones incident remains one of the most unforgettable and chilling moments ever aired on live TV. It's remembered not just for its shock value, but for the man behind the flames, a man who felt so unheard and unsupported that he chose to make his final stand in the most public way possible. His death was not just a protest, it was a cry for dignity in a world that had, by his account, stripped him of it. It was a clear, sunny Tuesday morning in New York City on September 11th, 2001, the kind of day that felt too normal to ever be remembered for anything. People were heading to work, grabbing coffee, checking voicemails on chunky flip phones, completely unaware that the world as they knew it was about to change forever. At 8:46 a.m., the first sign that something was very wrong came in the form of American Airlines Flight 11, which slammed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. Smoke billowed from the building as news channels scrambled to cover what initially looked like a horrific accident. Anchors speculated about a small plane, pilot error, or some kind of navigation failure. Cameramen zoomed in on the gaping hole. Firefighters were rushing in, and nobody quite knew what to make of it. Then, 17 minutes later, while the world was still trying to process what had just happened, the second plane showed up, and this one arrived on live television. At exactly 9:03 a.m., United Airlines Flight 175 came into frame like something out of a nightmare. It flew low and fast, banking ever so slightly before plunging straight into the South Tower in a fiery explosion that left millions of people around the globe staring at their TVs in pure shock. This wasn't a replay, and it definitely wasn't a movie. It was real, it was live, and it was devastating. The moment the second plane hit, the narrative changed instantly. This wasn't some bizarre accident, it was an attack. A coordinated, deliberate, terrifying attack. News anchors went from confused to horrified in real time, their voices cracking as they tried to make sense of what they were witnessing. Many people watching at home didn't even realize what was happening until it was over. Some thought it was a special effect or a re-airing of the first crash. But no, this was different. This was history unfolding in the most terrifying and unfiltered way imaginable. Multiple camera angles caught the second strike, news helicopters hovering above Manhattan, amateur videographers on the ground, and even tourists who just happened to be pointing their camcorders at the towers. One particularly famous clip, captured by the French filmmaker brothers Jules and Gédéon Naudet, shows a group of firefighters preparing to respond to the first crash when the second plane suddenly roars overhead and slams into the South Tower. The firefighters' reactions are a mix of awe, disbelief, and raw fear, and it mirrors what everyone else was feeling at that moment. That second impact made everything horrifyingly clear. America was under attack, and this was only the beginning of what would become one of the darkest days in modern history. The footage of the second plane strike quickly became one of the most replayed and analyzed video clips in the world. It's now a permanent part of history, archived, dissected, and remembered by anyone who lived through it. In many ways, that live broadcast forced the world to collectively witness the horror as it happened. It was the moment that tore away the illusion of safety and ushered in an era of fear, resilience, war, and global change. Watching the second plane hit the South Tower live wasn't just a shocking TV moment. It was a front-row seat to a tragedy that would reshape the 21st century. The footage didn't just capture a building being hit. It captured the instant a nation realized everything had changed. In July 2017, Christy and Kenneth Manzanares set sail on what was meant to be a joyful, week-long cruise aboard the Emerald Princess with Princess Cruises. Departing from Seattle and heading toward the stunning landscapes of Alaska, this wasn't just any vacation. It marked a special milestone, the couple's 18th wedding anniversary. Joined by their 3 daughters and other family members, it was meant to be a celebration of love that began when they were high school sweethearts. But instead of joy, the voyage turned tragic just days after it began. Early in the cruise, Kenneth's behavior reportedly became increasingly erratic, causing visible discomfort for Christy. One night, after returning to their cabin, tensions between the couple boiled over. The argument escalated quickly, and in a moment of raw honesty, Christy allegedly told Kenneth she was done with the marriage and intended to file for divorce once they were back home. She even asked him to disembark early, hoping to finish the trip in peace. That confrontation would end in horror. As the argument intensified, Kenneth ordered their daughters out of the cabin. Moments after they left, they heard chilling screams from inside, screams that signaled something was terribly wrong. Unable to get back inside, the girls rushed to the connected balcony. What they saw was a nightmare. Their father straddling Christy on the bed, violently punching her in the head and face. In the chaos, Kenneth allegedly attempted to push Christy overboard, but a nearby passenger witnessed the struggle and intervened, grabbing her ankles and pulling her back into the cabin. By this point, the situation had turned critical. Cruise staff were alerted and security rushed to the scene, but it was too late. Christy was found on the cabin floor, covered in blood with devastating head injuries. Kenneth, his hands and clothes soaked in blood, stood amid the grisly aftermath. Security immediately handcuffed him and held him in a separate cabin until the ship reached port and FBI agents could take over. Because the crime occurred at sea, it fell under federal jurisdiction. An autopsy later confirmed what was already tragically evident. Christy had died from blunt force trauma. Kenneth was charged with second-degree murder, and what followed was a deeply disturbing legal battle. His defense claimed that he suffered from an undiagnosed brain injury and mood disorder. They argued that a combination of prescription medication and alcohol triggered a sudden and uncontrollable outburst, but prosecutors painted a very different picture, one of premeditated violence. They pointed out that Kenneth told the girls to leave and locked the door before launching the fatal attack. During his processing by the FBI, Kenneth reportedly uttered, "My life is over," a remark that hinted at a clear awareness of his actions. Eventually, Kenneth entered into a plea agreement, admitting guilt to second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 30 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole, and was to serve an additional 5 years of supervised release after his sentence. Before being transferred to a long-term federal facility, Kenneth was held at Lemon Creek Correctional Center in Alaska. But just weeks after sentencing, he was found unresponsive in his cell. Though no foul play was suspected, details surrounding his death and medical condition were kept confidential under prison policy. The Manzanares case shocked the cruising world and left a family devastated. What began as a celebration of lasting love turned into one of the most tragic and horrifying events to ever take place aboard a cruise ship. On the morning of July 15th, 1974, in the small city of Sarasota, Florida, a young television journalist named Christine Chubbuck arrived at WXLT-TV, Channel 40, carrying a bag that held more than just scripts. She was calm, composed, and even joked with her colleagues before going live on air. What they didn't know was that Christine had spent weeks preparing for what would become one of the most shocking and tragic moments in broadcast history. She would take her own life, live on television. Christine wasn't your average local news anchor. She was smart, serious about her work, and often clashed with station management over their preference for sensational, violent stories. She believed in meaningful journalism, not just blood, guts, and car crashes. Ironically, that was exactly the kind of content her station was chasing, and exactly what she referenced before ending her life. That morning, during the broadcast of Suncoast Digest, a public affairs show she usually hosted, Christine read a few local news items. Then, without changing her tone or demeanor, she looked into the camera and said, "In keeping with Channel 40's policy of bringing you the latest in blood and guts and in living color, you are going to see another first, attempted suicide." Before anyone could react, Christine pulled out a .38 caliber Smith & Wesson revolver from beneath her desk, placed it behind her right ear, and pulled the trigger. The screen quickly faded to black. Viewers at home were left stunned, and in the studio, chaos broke out. Her coworkers initially thought it might be a dark joke or a twisted stunt, but when they reached her and saw the severity of the wound, the horrifying reality hit. Christine was rushed to Sarasota Memorial Hospital, where she remained in critical condition for 14 hours before succumbing to her injury. She was just 29 years old. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment act. Christine had been suffering from severe depression for years. She had even been seeing a psychiatrist, though her family said they didn't realize how deep her struggles truly were. She lived at home with her parents and had often expressed feelings of loneliness and frustration, especially over her lack of social connections and romantic relationships. Just weeks before the incident, she told a colleague she had bought a gun and planned to do something crazy. They thought she was joking. Christine had gone as far as to write a complete script for that day's broadcast, including a post-shooting bulletin to be read by another anchor. In it, she even included her condition and the name of the hospital she would be taken to. She had also requested to do a special segment on suicide not long before her death, hoping to interview local officials about prevention and mental health. The request was denied. After her death, the network and station were heavily criticized, not only for their content policies, but for failing to recognize the signs. However, Christine had been deliberate in hiding the full extent of her intentions. The video of her final broadcast was never aired again. Only one known tape existed, which was turned over to her family and later reportedly destroyed. Christine Chubbuck's tragic final act left behind more than shock. It sparked vital conversations about mental illness, media ethics, and the human cost of sensational news. Her story was later retold in documentaries and dramatized in the critically acclaimed 2016 film Christine. Today, her name is often remembered alongside discussions about suicide awareness, the pressures of journalism, and the importance of recognizing cries for help, even when they're masked by a smile and a sign on script. On January 2, 2023, during a nationally televised Monday Night Football game between the Buffalo Bills and the Cincinnati Bengals, a horrifying moment unfolded that stunned millions of viewers and shook the entire sports world. Damar Hamlin, a 24-year-old safety for the Buffalo Bills, collapsed suddenly on the field after executing what initially appeared to be a routine tackle. In the first quarter of the game, Hamlin tackled Bengals wide receiver T. Higgins, rose to his feet briefly, and then abruptly fell backward onto the turf, unresponsive. What followed was one of the most distressing scenes ever broadcast during a live sporting event. Medical personnel rushed onto the field within seconds. It became clear this was no ordinary injury. Hamlin had suffered cardiac arrest. First responders administered CPR on the field for nearly 10 minutes, and an automated external defibrillator, AED, was used to restart his heart. Players from both teams formed a solemn circle around Hamlin, many of them kneeling in prayer or openly weeping, unable to hold back emotion as their teammate and opponent fought for his life right in front of them. The gravity of the situation was felt not only by those in the stadium, but by the millions watching at home. The ESPN broadcast, caught in a moment with no precedent, shifted into solemn silence and careful updates. Commentators, clearly shaken, did their best to communicate facts without adding to the panic. What had been a normal football game had instantly turned into a life-and-death emergency broadcast live across the world. The NFL made the decision to suspend and ultimately cancel the game, a rare move, especially in such a high-stakes late-season matchup. But at that moment, football no longer mattered. Hamlin was transported by ambulance to the University of Cincinnati Medical Center, where he was listed in critical condition and placed on a ventilator. The diagnosis was later revealed to be commotio cordis, a rare and often deadly condition where a sudden blow to the chest during a critical window in the heart's rhythm causes it to stop. The odds of surviving such an event are slim, especially without immediate response. But thanks to the quick action of medical personnel, the presence of emergency equipment, and proper training, Damar Hamlin's life was saved. Over the next few days, updates on Hamlin's condition were closely followed across the country. Messages of support flooded in from fellow athletes, celebrities, fans, and even political leaders. His Toy Drive charity, originally created with a modest goal, raised millions of dollars almost overnight as people sought some way to show support. By January 11th, just 9 days later, Hamlin was discharged from the hospital and began his journey toward recovery. His story didn't end there. Hamlin made a remarkable recovery and, in a turn that many deemed miraculous, returned to the NFL field later that same year. More than just a football player, he became a symbol of hope, resilience, and the importance of emergency preparedness in sports. He partnered with the American Heart Association, campaigned for wider access to CPR training, and spoke openly about his experience to raise awareness about cardiac health. The incident sparked a national conversation about player safety and emergency medical response, not just in professional sports, but at all levels of competition. It served as a stark reminder that behind every jersey is a human life, and that split-second decisions and proper medical support can make the difference between tragedy and survival. Damar Hamlin's collapse was one of the most terrifying moments in recent sports history, but it ultimately became a story of survival, unity, and the power of quick action and collective care. In October 2013, 6-year-old Quentin Hunter joined his family, father Cassell, mother Tashara, and 10-year-old brother Jermaine, on a 4-day cruise aboard the Carnival Victory. The boys were having a blast, especially splashing around in the ship's pool. As the cruise neared its final stretch, the brothers begged their dad for one last swim. Cassell agreed, unawares that this decision would lead to tragedy. At first, Cassell kept a close eye on Quentin and Jermaine as they dove into the pool and played. There were no other swimmers nearby, and no lifeguards on duty. Around them, a few people were getting ready for the final party on the deck, including a DJ setting up his gear. Distracted by a conversation with one of his wife's church friends, Cassell briefly looked away from the pool, just for a few minutes. But those minutes were enough for disaster to strike. Suddenly, the DJ shouted for help, calling for someone to pull a drowning child out of the water. Cassell turned to see a stranger leap into the pool and rescue Quentin. At that moment, Jermaine wasn't in the pool. He had stepped out earlier to dance to the DJ's music, leaving Quentin alone in the water. As soon as Quentin was pulled out, chaos erupted. People scrambled to resuscitate the young boy, but despite their efforts, his lungs were already filled with water. Tashara had just arrived to gather the family for dinner when she saw Quentin lying lifeless by the poolside, a moment she later described as her worst nightmare. The ship's doctor eventually pronounced Quentin dead. Following a thorough investigation, Quentin's death was ruled accidental with no suspicion of foul play. But for the Hunter family, the pain was unbearable. After burying their beloved son, Quentin's parents sought justice, hoping to hold the cruise line accountable for the absence of lifeguards. However, they soon hit a legal wall. Maritime law, under the Death on the High Seas Act, only allows families to claim financial losses like lost support or funeral costs. It doesn't cover emotional suffering, pain, or loss of companionship. This left the Hunters unable to seek compensation for the deep emotional trauma they endured. Adding to their frustration, the Hunters learned that cruise ships aren't required to have lifeguards on their pools. The only legal obligation is to post clear signs warning passengers that no lifeguard is on duty, similar to policies at many hotels and resorts on land. This lack of mandatory supervision on cruise ship pools has left many passengers vulnerable, especially young children. Despite their grief and the heartbreaking loss of Quentin, the only response from the cruise line was a formal apology. For the Hunters, that apology was not enough. It didn't address their concerns about pool safety or the risks cruise ships pose to families with young children. Quentin's tragic death has since sparked conversation about the need for stronger safety measures on cruise ships, especially when it comes to protecting children in pools. His story serves as a heartbreaking reminder that behind the fun and excitement of cruising, dangers can lurk, sometimes with devastating consequences. If there was ever a moment in American history that played out like a surreal crime drama, live, unfiltered, and utterly shocking, it was the shooting of Lee Harvey Oswald on November 24, 1963. Just 2 days earlier, the nation had been devastated by the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, who was shot while riding in a motorcade through Dallas, Texas. The prime suspect, Lee Harvey Oswald, had been swiftly arrested, and though his guilt was widely assumed, he had not yet stood trial. He was a former Marine, a drifter, a defector to the Soviet Union, and an enigmatic figure with many unanswered questions swirling around him. The country was hungry for answers, but those answers died with Oswald, in front of a live television audience. It all happened at the Dallas Police Headquarters, where Oswald was being transferred from the city jail to the county jail. The building was crawling with reporters, flashing cameras, and tense law enforcement officers. The press had been alerted to the transfer, and in a decision that would be heavily criticized later, they were allowed to watch from the basement garage. Oswald, handcuffed and flanked by police officers, was led out through a corridor in what was meant to be a routine transfer. But just as he stepped into the garage, a man suddenly lunged forward from the crowd, raised a small .38 caliber revolver, and fired a single shot into Oswald's abdomen. The shooter was Jack Ruby, a 52-year-old Dallas nightclub owner with ties to the criminal underworld and a fondness for the local police. His motives, to this day, remain clouded in mystery. Ruby later claimed that he was overwhelmed with grief and anger over Kennedy's death and wanted to spare Jacqueline Kennedy the agony of a drawn-out trial. But many weren't convinced. Conspiracy theories immediately exploded. Was Ruby silencing Oswald on behalf of the Mafia, the CIA, foreign powers, or was he just a deranged man looking for his moment in the spotlight? The fact that Ruby had such easy access to Oswald right inside a police station only fueled suspicions of a deeper cover-up. Millions of Americans watched the event unfold in real time. It was the first homicide ever broadcast live on national television. Viewers saw Oswald grimace in pain, collapse to the floor, and be quickly surrounded by stunned officers. He was rushed to Parkland Memorial Hospital, the same hospital where Kennedy had been pronounced dead just 2 days earlier, but Oswald didn't survive. With that single gunshot, the opportunity to fully unravel the truth behind the president's assassination vanished. In the aftermath, Ruby was arrested and eventually convicted of murder. He was sentenced to death, but his conviction was overturned on appeal. Before he could be retried, Ruby died of cancer in 1967. To this day, countless books, films, documentaries, and investigations have tried to piece together the puzzle of what really happened in those chaotic days. The Warren Commission concluded that both Oswald and Ruby acted alone, but that answer has satisfied few. For many, Oswald's live execution only deepened the mystery and left wounds in the American psyche that have never fully healed. The killing of Lee Harvey Oswald wasn't just a bizarre moment in television history. It was a turning point that left an entire nation haunted, not just by what they had seen, but by what they would never know.